Subscribe to my channel because more beautiful videos are waiting for you later.
The Edwardian era, spanning roughly from 1901 to 1910 during the reign of King Edward VII, was a period of striking contrasts. While the elite indulged in luxury, elaborate social gatherings, and elaborate fashions, the majority of the population faced harsh realities, particularly during the winter months. England's winters in this era could be bitterly cold, with biting winds sweeping across industrial cities and snowdrifts isolating rural communities. Heating was rudimentary, insulation poor, and the infrastructure of towns and cities was ill-equipped to handle prolonged cold spells. Despite this, Edwardians developed a range of strategies to survive the brutal winter, combining social, technological, and cultural adaptations. The first, and perhaps most immediate defense against winter's chill, was clothing. Layering became a practical necessity. Middle and upper-class Edwardians had access to wool, flannel, and heavy overcoats, often lined with fur, which provided critical insulation against the cold. Men typically wore waistcoats, long wool trousers, and overcoats with high collars to guard against wind. Hats were essential. Bowler hats and wide-brimmed fedoras were more than fashion statements. They were practical barriers against frostbite. Women, meanwhile, faced the dual pressures of fashion and warmth. Long skirts, often layered over petticoats, combined with heavy corsets and high-necked blouses, created a surprising amount of insulation. Shawls, capes, and fur-lined coats became ubiquitous during the harshest months. Even children were bundled tightly, with woolen stockings, mittens, and scarves to prevent hypothermia. In working-class households, clothing adaptations were less about style and more about survival. Many families repurposed worn garments, layering multiple shirts or skirts to stay warm. Socks and mittens were carefully patched to extend their life through winter. It was common for families to sleep in multiple layers of clothing, including nightcaps, to retain body heat during nights when central heating was a distant luxury. This was particularly true in tenements or rural cottages, where drafts and thin walls allowed cold air to seep relentlessly inside. Heating homes presented a significant challenge. In wealthier households, coal-fired fireplaces were common, and the Edwardian fascination with ornate mantels made them both functional and decorative. Servants would tend fires throughout the day, ensuring rooms remained warm, while stoking smaller stoves in kitchens to prevent pipes from freezing. The coal itself, often purchased in bulk, could be stored in specially designed bins or cellars to keep it dry, as damp coal burned poorly. Some middle-class homes relied on cast-iron radiators connected to primitive steam or hot water systems, a technology that was just beginning to spread. These systems offered more consistent heat, but were expensive and limited mostly to urban areas. For those without access to central heating, ingenuity was essential. Many families relied on bed warmers, metal pans filled with hot coals that could be slid under heavy blankets, or heated bricks wrapped in cloth. Hot water bottles, though simple, were treasured possessions, especially in households with young children. Rural populations, cut off from coal deliveries, often relied on wood-burning stoves or even peat fires. Collecting sufficient fuel was a major winter concern, as depleted forests or poor harvests could make firewood scarce. The effort to maintain a fire was constant, requiring careful attention to air supply, flue management, and the condition of the fuel. Nutrition also played a critical role in winter survival. High-calorie meals helped people endure cold temperatures, providing the energy necessary to generate body heat. Root vegetables such as potatoes, turnips, and carrots were staples, often stored in cellars to last through months of snow and frost. Meat, when available, was roasted or stewed slowly, producing warmth in addition to sustenance. Porridges, made from oats or barley, were common for breakfast, offering calories and comfort. Wealthier families might enjoy more varied diets, including preserved fruits, winter greens, and rich meats, while working-class diets were simpler but still focused on hearty, filling foods. Community support systems also became crucial. In towns and villages, neighbors frequently shared resources during harsh winters, whether firewood, food, or shelter for travelers stranded by snow. Public baths, although more common in urban centers, were important for hygiene during cold months when indoor plumbing was limited. Churches and charitable organizations often distributed food or warm clothing to those in need, creating a network of mutual aid that could mean the difference between survival and hardship. These communal practices reflected not only necessity, but also a deeply ingrained culture of social cohesion, which helped Edwardians endure long, isolated winters. Transportation was another area where winter posed serious challenges. Snow and ice could render roads impassable, isolating communities and making the delivery of food and coal more difficult. Horse-drawn carriages were common, but horses required their own shelter and feed during severe weather. Urban dwellers adapted by walking more frequently, often braving icy pavements in heavy boots. In coastal regions, winter storms could disrupt shipping routes, affecting the supply of imported goods and exacerbating local scarcity. In response, Edwardians learned to anticipate the seasonal rhythm, stockpiling essentials and relying on local produce when imports were delayed. Health was intimately tied to winter survival. Influenza, pneumonia, and other respiratory illnesses were more prevalent during cold months. Limited medical knowledge and a scarcity of doctors meant that prevention was often the best defense. Layered clothing, adequate heating, and calorie-dense diets were all part of an informal strategy to maintain health. Families emphasized cleanliness, regular airing of rooms, and the careful management of fire and smoke to reduce the risk of respiratory infections. Those who could afford it sometimes traveled south during the coldest months, seeking milder climates for health reasons, although this was largely limited to the wealthy. Even leisure and social life adapted to the winter climate. Indoor activities flourished, from reading and sewing to hosting small gatherings. Wealthy households maintained extensive libraries, music rooms, and game parlors where warmth was concentrated and social interaction could continue despite outdoor cold. For the working class, storytelling, communal singing, and visiting neighbors provided both warmth and psychological comfort. The rhythm of winter dictated a slower pace, and Edwardians of all classes developed cultural rituals, afternoons by the fire, tea ceremonies, or winter fairs that transformed harsh months into a season of endurance coupled with domestic and community engagement.
As the Edwardian era progressed, the challenges of surviving brutal winters spurred innovations and adaptations that were both practical and at times ingenious. Technological improvements, though still limited by modern standards, began to transform daily life in both urban and rural communities. One of the most significant advancements was the slow spread of indoor plumbing and gas or early electric lighting, which, while not directly heating homes, indirectly contributed to winter survival. Gas lighting allowed families to extend productive hours into the evening, reducing the need to huddle by dwindling candlelight and enabling more efficient use of heating stoves. Indoor plumbing, where available, reduced the need for arduous trips outside to fetch water in freezing conditions, which in turn minimized exposure to frostbite and illness. In urban areas, public infrastructure played an increasingly important role. Edwardian cities were beginning to recognize the need for better sanitation and access to communal heating. Public baths, steam rooms, and community centers offered warmth, hygiene, and social interaction, which were critical during the cold months. Libraries and reading rooms, often heated by coal or early steam systems, became refuges for both the young and the elderly, providing not just physical warmth but mental stimulation during the long, dark evenings. Municipal authorities also began experimenting with early forms of street clearing and snow management, particularly in wealthier districts, ensuring that essential services could continue despite winter storms. Rural populations faced unique challenges that required a blend of ingenuity and hard labor. Isolated cottages were often poorly insulated, with walls of thin stone or timber that allowed cold winds to penetrate. Families compensated by constructing interior windbreaks, screens, or partitions that reduced drafts in sleeping and cooking areas. Straw, reeds, and rushes were commonly used to cover floors, both for insulation and to minimize moisture from frost or snow tracked indoors. Hearth fires were carefully tended, with smoke sometimes allowed to fill a room temporarily to discourage dampness, while still maintaining a balance to prevent suffocation. Fuel acquisition remained a central concern. Wood, peat, and coal were the primary sources of heat, but the supply was often uncertain. Rural families would stockpile during the fall, cutting and drying wood months in advance, while urban dwellers relied on coal merchants whose deliveries could be delayed by inclement weather. In some regions, households turned to unconventional sources, burning dried animal dung or leftover agricultural refuse when traditional fuels ran low. Managing these resources required constant vigilance, careful rationing, and ingenuity in stove and fireplace design to maximize heat output while minimizing fuel consumption. Water management was also a winter challenge. Frozen wells or iced-over rivers could leave households without a reliable water source. Families often relied on collecting and storing water before the freeze, keeping it in cellars or insulated barrels. Melting snow was another method, though it was labor-intensive and required large fires. For many, these winter water strategies were not optional. They were essential for cooking, cleaning, and maintaining personal hygiene, which in turn affected health and resilience against cold-related illnesses. Food storage and preservation were likewise crucial. Root cellars, pantries, and larders were meticulously organized to ensure a steady supply of vegetables, grains, and preserved meats throughout the winter months. Techniques such as pickling, salting, smoking, and fermenting were widespread. For the working class, meat might be rationed, while root vegetables and grains became the cornerstone of the diet. Preserved fruits, jams, and winter greens supplemented nutrition where fresh produce was unavailable. In some households, livestock was kept indoors during severe weather to provide warmth and a ready supply of dairy, further illustrating the integration of survival strategies into daily routines. Travel and communication adapted to winter conditions in remarkable ways. Snow and ice could disrupt postal services and commerce, so Edwardians became adept at contingency planning. In rural areas, sledges or sleighs pulled by horses replaced wheeled carts during deep snow. In towns, citizens learned to navigate icy streets cautiously, using studded boots or walking sticks to prevent slips. Railways, which were a primary means of long-distance travel, faced delays and occasional shutdowns, prompting communities to maintain local self-sufficiency and stockpile necessary supplies in anticipation of isolation. Health remained a pressing concern. Cold, damp conditions made respiratory diseases common, and inadequate nutrition or exposure could quickly weaken individuals. Families relied on layered clothing, proper bedding, and hot food to maintain strength. Herbal remedies and traditional medicine were widely used, with poultices, teas, and infusions believed to ward off colds and fever. Vaccinations for diseases like smallpox existed, but they were far from universal, so prevention through warmth, cleanliness, and nutrition was often the primary defense. Home remedies were passed down through generations, combining practical experience with folk knowledge to create a localized system of winter medicine. Social customs and seasonal rituals reinforced survival strategies. Winter fairs, market days, and church gatherings were not merely recreational, they were essential for exchanging information, sharing resources, and reinforcing community bonds. Families would gather indoors for storytelling, games, and music, keeping spirits high when the outside world was harsh and unforgiving. For children, these indoor activities were vital for both warmth and morale, as playgrounds and outdoor spaces became inhospitable. Winter holidays, particularly Christmas, were celebrated with elaborate feasts and decorative warmth, creating pockets of comfort in otherwise harsh conditions. Education, too, adapted to the cold. Schools in urban areas had coal-fired stoves to keep classrooms warm, while rural schools relied on smaller wood-burning heaters.
During severe snowstorms, attendance could drop sharply, prompting communities to organize informal lessons at homes or in local halls. Teachers were acutely aware of the connection between warmth, concentration, and learning, and they emphasized practical skills alongside academics, teaching children how to dress, manage fires, and maintain personal health during the coldest months. By combining technological innovation, resource management, community cooperation, and cultural adaptation, Edwardians developed a resilient approach to winter survival. These strategies reflected a deep understanding of the environment and a willingness to adapt daily life to the natural rhythms of the season. Whether through careful layering, ingenious fuel management, or communal support, survival during Edwardian winters was a multifaceted challenge that demanded both foresight and daily effort. Housing design played a crucial role in how Edwardians endured the bitter cold of winter. In urban areas, the expansion of cities during the late Victorian and Edwardian periods had left many working-class families living in cramped, poorly insulated tenements. These buildings, often constructed with thin brick walls and limited ventilation, allowed winter winds to seep in through cracks and unglazed windows. To combat the chill, residents employed creative solutions. Thick curtains, often layered with wool or heavy fabrics, were hung over windows to trap heat. Doors between rooms were kept closed to conserve warmth, and draft stoppers, sometimes simple rolls of cloth, were placed along thresholds. In some homes, furniture was strategically positioned near stoves or fireplaces to create small warm zones where families could gather during the coldest periods. Rural cottages presented a different set of challenges and opportunities. Many homes were built from stone or timber, and thatched roofs, while effective in shedding rain, provided minimal insulation against snow and wind. To retain heat, families relied on central hearths and stoves, often constructing brick or clay enclosures to direct warmth into living areas. Ceilings were kept low where possible, reducing the volume of air that needed to be heated. Some households went further, lining walls with tapestries, cloth, or even additional layers of wood to block drafts. These adaptations reflected a deep understanding of environmental control long before modern insulation materials were available. Stoves themselves were evolving during the Edwardian era. Coal-burning iron stoves became more efficient, allowing households to heat food and rooms simultaneously. Some stoves were equipped with ovens, which not only facilitated cooking, but radiated steady heat throughout the room. Wealthier households experimented with early forms of central heating, using hot water or steam radiators to maintain a consistent temperature. These innovations, however, were far from universal. For most families, managing a stove or fireplace required constant attention. Adding fuel, adjusting airflow, and monitoring flames were daily tasks critical to comfort and survival. Lighting, often taken for granted today, influenced winter survival as well. Gas lamps provided brighter, more reliable illumination than candles, allowing families to engage in evening tasks without relying solely on the hearth for warmth. This made household chores, educational activities, and leisure pursuits more feasible during long winter nights. In some affluent homes, electricity began to replace gas lighting, further reducing fire hazards and allowing heat sources to be managed more efficiently. Even incremental improvements in light availability could transform a household's ability to cope with the dark, cold months. Seasonal labor patterns were also intimately tied to winter survival. In rural areas, farm work slowed during the coldest months, but certain tasks became critical, such as tending livestock, preserving food, and maintaining fuel supplies. Children and adults alike were involved in preparing for winter months well in advance, from harvesting and storing crops to chopping wood and securing coal. Urban laborers, meanwhile, faced challenges when extreme weather disrupted transportation or slowed industrial production.
Factories and workshops had to maintain warmth for workers, often relying on large central stoves or localized heating methods. Absenteeism due to illness or icy roads was a constant concern, prompting employers and communities to adapt schedules and priorities to ensure both survival and productivity. Clothing continued to play a central role in everyday adaptation. Beyond layering, Edwardians paid attention to the materials and fit of garments. Wool, flannel, and fur were preferred for their insulating properties, while multiple layers trapped heat effectively. Accessories such as gloves, scarves, and hats were indispensable. Footwear was similarly critical. Boots lined with felt or leather provided protection against snow and ice. For the working class, clothing often represented both protection and social identity, with garments patched and mended repeatedly to extend their usefulness. In wealthier households, tailored outerwear combined style with function, ensuring warmth while maintaining social expectations of appearance. Dietary adjustments became increasingly strategic as winter set in. High-energy foods were prioritized to fuel physical activity and maintain body heat. In urban areas, meat pies, stews, and dense bread provided both calories and comfort, while soups made from seasonal vegetables offered warmth and hydration. Rural households relied heavily on preserved foods, supplemented by foraged items or small-scale hunting and trapping. Local knowledge about seasonal nutrition was widespread, emphasizing foods that provided sustained energy and reduced vulnerability to illness. Local markets adapted as well, with vendors offering root vegetables, preserved meats, and other staples in response to winter demands. Health precautions were closely linked to environmental control. Cold weather increased susceptibility to respiratory infections, and overcrowding in urban dwellings exacerbated the risk. Families learned to manage airflow carefully, avoiding damp conditions, while ensuring that smoke from fires did not overwhelm living spaces. Regular bathing, though more challenging during winter, was emphasized wherever possible, with public baths serving as critical resources. Herbal remedies, poultices, and teas were commonly used to treat colds and minor ailments, while attention to diet and warmth served as preventive measures. These practices reflected a blend of tradition, practical experience, and emerging medical understanding. Community cohesion was perhaps the most powerful tool for survival. Neighbors often shared resources, such as firewood or coal, and offered shelter to those in need. Rural communities frequently organized collective efforts to maintain roads, clear snow, and transport essential goods. In towns, local charities, churches, and civic groups coordinated assistance for vulnerable populations, providing food, clothing, and temporary warmth. These networks fostered resilience, ensuring that individuals were not entirely dependent on their own limited resources. Shared knowledge about coping strategies, from stove management to clothing and diet, was passed through generations, reinforcing both survival and social bonds. Winter leisure activities also reinforced physical and mental resilience. While outdoor sports were limited by harsh conditions, indoor pastimes such as reading, sewing, music, and games became central to family life. Wealthier households might host soirees or musical evenings, while working-class families relied on storytelling, communal singing, and small social gatherings. These activities provided emotional warmth and distraction, helping people endure the monotony and hardship of long winter nights. The psychological benefits of these social rituals were as important as physical adaptations, shaping a culture of endurance that permeated Edwardian society. Transportation and communication strategies continued to evolve in response to winter challenges. Snow, ice, and frost could disrupt postal services, commerce, and everyday travel. Communities developed local solutions, including sledges, reinforced pathways, and contingency stockpiles to maintain essential functions. Horse-drawn carriages remained vital, but horses required shelter and nourishment, placing additional demands on households. The growing reach of railways and tram systems, while sometimes disrupted by snow, allowed urban populations to access markets, jobs, and resources more reliably than ever before, representing a critical link between survival and economic stability. By the conclusion of the first winter months, the Edwardian household had developed a complex system of routines, adaptations, and community networks. These strategies combined technology, architecture, clothing, diet, health practices, and social organization to create a multifaceted approach to surviving what was often a punishing season. Endurance required foresight, resourcefulness, and cooperation, underscoring the interplay between individual initiative and collective support in Edwardian society.
Winter in the Edwardian era was as much a social challenge as a physical one, and survival strategies were deeply influenced by work patterns, education, and class distinctions. For working-class families, the cold months brought a combination of economic pressure and physical strain. Many laborers were employed in factories, workshops, or manual trades that could not simply pause because of frost or snow. Maintaining warmth while performing physically demanding work was essential, and employers were increasingly aware that productivity relied on a workforce protected from the worst of winter's effects. Factory stoves, rudimentary though they were, provided heat in common areas, while workers often relied on thick, layered clothing, gloves, and scarves to shield exposed skin. Night shifts presented additional difficulties, as the darkness and icy conditions compounded the challenge of staying warm and alert. Seasonal employment also shaped survival strategies. In rural communities, farm labor slowed as crops were harvested and livestock sheltered, but winter work remained vital. Families engaged in food preservation, wood cutting, and repairing structures damaged by autumn storms. Men and older boys often traveled to neighboring villages or towns to supplement family income, bringing back coal, flour, or other essential supplies. Women oversaw domestic management, ensuring fires were maintained, meals prepared, and clothing and bedding were sufficient to sustain the household. Children, too, contributed significantly, fetching water, tending fires, or assisting with food storage. This shared labor created a rhythm to winter life that combined survival with preparation for the coming spring. Education adapted to these seasonal realities. Urban schools, often heated by coal stoves, offered a limited refuge from the cold, but attendance could drop sharply during severe weather. Rural schools faced even greater challenges, with children sometimes walking miles through snow or frozen mud to reach classrooms. Teachers, aware of these obstacles, occasionally conducted lessons in local homes or community centers, creating informal educational networks that reinforced both literacy and practical skills. Curriculum often included guidance on personal health, hygiene, and household management during winter, reflecting the era's understanding that knowledge and preparation were essential for survival. Class distinctions had a profound impact on winter resilience. The wealthy could retreat to country estates or well-heated city homes, where coal fires, multiple bedrooms, and insulated walls provided comfort. They could afford rich, varied diets, access to medical care, and leisure activities that mitigated the hardships of cold months. In contrast, working-class families faced persistent challenges. Thin clothing, overcrowded housing, and limited access to quality food made winter a constant struggle. Yet the divide was not merely economic, it was also cultural. Survival required practical knowledge, communal cooperation, and adaptability, skills that were deeply embedded in daily life for those with fewer material resources. Rural versus urban adaptations diverged in other ways as well. In the countryside, winter survival was intimately tied to the land. Livestock required constant attention, and frozen water sources demanded creative solutions, such as breaking ice daily or storing water in insulated containers. Crops had to be managed in storage, with root vegetables, grains, and preserved fruits monitored for spoilage. Fuel collection, particularly wood and peat, was labor-intensive and essential. In towns, residents contended with confined living spaces, polluted air, and the need for public cooperation to maintain roads, manage waste, and distribute coal. Both environments demanded resilience, but the strategies differed. Rural life relied heavily on self-sufficiency, while urban survival depended more on infrastructure and community networks. Cultural practices also shaped how Edwardians endured the cold. Winter festivals, religious observances, and local fairs offered opportunities for community bonding and shared warmth. Music, storytelling, and games were not merely diversions, they were psychological tools that reinforced endurance and resilience. For children, these activities provided stimulation and socialization, compensating for the reduced outdoor play caused by snow, ice, and frigid temperatures. Adults, too, found comfort and motivation in communal events, which helped to alleviate the isolation and monotony that winter could impose. Food and nutrition remained central to winter resilience. Edwardians understood, even if not in scientific terms, that higher calorie diets were necessary during the cold months. Meals emphasized starches, fats, and proteins to maintain energy levels, while soups, stews, and porridges provided warmth and hydration. Wealthier families could supplement these staples with imported goods, dairy, and preserved meats, while working-class households relied on local produce, grains, and root vegetables. Cooking methods were adapted to conserve heat. Large pots were left simmering to radiate warmth, and communal kitchens sometimes allowed families to share resources while cooking. The act of preparing and sharing food became both practical and social, reinforcing bonds while sustaining the body. Health and hygiene continued to shape winter strategies. Respiratory illnesses were prevalent, and the combination of cold, damp, and indoor crowding increased risk. Families emphasized careful stove management, clothing layers, and proper ventilation to balance warmth and air quality. Herbal remedies, poultices, and teas remained common, often combined with dietary adjustments to strengthen the immune system. For wealthier households, access to doctors and treatments offered additional protection, but in most communities, survival depended on practical knowledge and day-to-day management of environment and resources. Housing remained a focal point for adaptation. Families learned to manipulate space to concentrate warmth, creating microenvironments where heat was retained and droughts minimized. Fireplaces and stoves were strategically placed, doors and windows sealed with cloth or wood, and floors covered with rushes, carpets, or straw. In urban tenements, multiple families sometimes shared rooms to conserve heat, while in rural homes, low ceilings and compact layouts helped contain warmth. These structural adaptations complemented clothing, diet, and labor routines to create a holistic approach to enduring winter. Finally, Edwardians developed routines and rhythms designed to align human activity with seasonal conditions. Early morning tasks were performed quickly to minimize exposure to cold, while indoor activities dominated evenings and stormy days. Nighttime was spent in layered bedding, often with heated objects like hot water bottles or bricks to provide warmth. Daily life became a cycle of preparation, maintenance, and adaptation, with each member of the household contributing to survival. The season demanded foresight, patience, and resilience, a constant negotiation between human needs and the harsh realities of the natural environment. By understanding the interplay between work, education, social structure, housing, nutrition, health, and cultural practices, Edwardians developed a sophisticated system for surviving winter. Far from passive endurance, their strategies reflected knowledge, skill, and communal cooperation, ensuring that even the harshest months could be navigated with relative safety and comfort. The winter season was not merely a challenge, it was a defining feature of Edwardian life, shaping routines, relationships, and survival strategies across all levels of society.
Transportation was a critical concern during Edwardian winters, affecting everything from work to food supply. In cities, snow, ice, and frost frequently disrupted horse-drawn carriages, trams, and early motor vehicles. Streets became slick hazards, forcing pedestrians to navigate with care. Boots with thick soles or studded heels helped prevent slips, and walking sticks were common accessories for stability. For longer distances, horse-drawn sleighs often replaced carriages in rural areas, allowing families to transport firewood, water, and essential goods when roads were blocked by snowdrifts. Urban residents relied on early forms of public transport, but delays were frequent, and winter storms could isolate neighborhoods for days, highlighting the importance of local self-sufficiency and careful stockpiling. Railways were both a blessing and a challenge. Trains allowed towns and cities to remain connected even in deep winter, enabling the movement of coal, food, and other essentials. Yet they were vulnerable to snow and ice, which could halt service for hours or even days. Communities adapted by anticipating delays, keeping extra supplies on hand, and using local resources whenever long-distance shipments were interrupted. Rail workers faced grueling conditions, clearing tracks, maintaining engines, and ensuring passengers reached their destinations safely, often in temperatures well below freezing. The reliability of transport was a vital component of survival, linking urban and rural networks and maintaining both commerce and essential services. Winter emergencies required preparation and adaptability. Households faced sudden furnace failures, frozen pipes, or unexpected snowfall that cut off access to markets or fuel supplies. Families often developed contingency plans, such as keeping extra coal, wood, and dried foods stored safely indoors. Rural residents might have backup water sources, additional blankets, or alternative heating methods ready in case of stove or chimney failure. Urban communities organized volunteer networks or relied on civic institutions to help residents navigate emergencies. These systems reflected an understanding that winter was unpredictable, and survival depended on anticipating challenges before they became crises. Heating innovations continued to emerge. Cast iron stoves with improved airflow and multi-purpose designs allowed households to cook and heat rooms more efficiently. Wealthier homes experimented with early central heating, using steam or hot water radiators to maintain a consistent indoor climate. Even simple adjustments, such as positioning furniture strategically around a stove, closing off unused rooms, or covering windows with heavy drapes, dramatically improved comfort. Knowledge of heat management was widespread, passed down through generations, and often shared within communities. Mastery of these techniques was as vital as the quality of the heating equipment itself. Clothing innovations complemented housing and heating strategies. Edwardians experimented with materials and design to maximize warmth. Wool remained the primary choice for insulation, but layered garments, fur linings, and long coats became increasingly sophisticated. Children's clothing was carefully designed to protect against frostbite, with high collars, mittens, and hats. Men wore heavy overcoats and scarves, while women combined practical winter wear with fashion, layering dresses and skirts over petticoats and wearing long insulated coats. Even undergarments contributed to warmth, with flannel and wool commonly used to trap body heat. Clothing was not only a matter of survival, but also a reflection of social status and practicality, balancing function with appearance. Nutrition during winter months emphasized caloric density and warmth. Hearty meals, such as stews, porridge, and roasted meats, provided both sustenance and internal heat. Root vegetables, grains, and preserved foods supplemented diets when fresh produce was scarce. In urban areas, markets adapted to winter demands, offering seasonal staples, preserved meats, and locally stored vegetables. Rural households relied on their own storage systems, with root cellars, pantries, and barns carefully organized to prevent spoilage. Community sharing of surplus food sometimes occurred, especially in villages where harsh conditions might leave some families short of essential supplies. Health considerations remained a major factor in winter survival. The cold and damp increased susceptibility to respiratory illnesses, particularly among children and the elderly. Families emphasized hygiene, warm clothing, and diet to maintain resistance to illness. Herbal remedies and home treatments were widely used, while wealthier households had access to doctors and more sophisticated medicine. Clean air, proper ventilation, and smoke management from stoves and fires were critical, preventing respiratory distress while maintaining warmth.
Winter was both a physical and a medical challenge, requiring constant attention to environment, diet, and care routines. Community and social networks played an essential role in survival. Neighbors shared knowledge about coping with winter, assisted with fuel or food distribution, and offered shelter in times of need. Churches, charitable organizations, and civic institutions coordinated support for vulnerable populations, providing warm spaces, meals, and clothing. Social cohesion was both a practical necessity and a cultural value, reinforcing the idea that survival during harsh winters was a collective endeavor. Informal networks, from family connections to neighborhood alliances, ensured that knowledge, resources, and support were accessible when needed most. Education continued to adapt to seasonal challenges. Urban schools often relied on coal-fired stoves to keep classrooms warm, while rural schools faced the difficulty of transporting students through snow and ice. Attendance could fluctuate during extreme weather, and teachers sometimes conducted lessons in homes or communal spaces to ensure continuity. Curriculum included practical instruction on health, hygiene, and household management during winter months, reinforcing the skills necessary for survival. Children learned early the importance of preparedness, both in personal routines and in contributing to household resilience. Leisure and cultural adaptation were equally important. Winter evenings were dominated by indoor activities, from sewing and knitting to reading, music, and games. Wealthier homes might host formal gatherings or musical evenings, while working-class families engaged in storytelling, communal singing, or small social events. These activities provided mental stimulation, reinforced social bonds, and helped counter the isolation and monotony of long winter months. Psychological resilience, supported by culture and social interaction, was as essential as physical preparation in enduring Edwardian winters. By integrating transportation strategies, emergency preparedness, heating and clothing innovations, nutrition, health management, and social cohesion, Edwardians created a comprehensive system for surviving winter. The season demanded foresight, resourcefulness, and cooperation. It shaped daily routines, household management, and community life, embedding a rhythm of survival into the fabric of society. Each adaptation, from layering clothing to organizing communal resources, reflected a sophisticated understanding of environmental challenges and the human capacity to endure and thrive despite them.
Winter health crises were among the most pressing challenges Edwardians face. The cold months brought increased incidence of respiratory illnesses such as influenza, pneumonia, bronchitis, and tuberculosis. These conditions thrived in poorly heated and crowded homes, where dampness and stagnant air compromised immunity. Families understood that maintaining warmth and dry living conditions was essential for survival. Layered clothing, heavy bedding, and properly stoked fires were complemented by simple preventative measures like keeping feet dry, wearing scarves over the mouth and nose when outdoors, and avoiding prolonged exposure to icy winds. Health management in winter was as much about vigilance and routine as it was about medical intervention. Children were especially vulnerable. They required both protection from the elements and sufficient nutrition to withstand the winter chill. Parents often bundled them in multiple layers of clothing and ensured that they spent as much time as possible in heated areas of the home. Nightcaps, mittens, thick socks, and woolen scarves were standard, and children often slept under multiple blankets, with heated objects such as hot water bottles or warm bricks tucked into bedding. School attendance was impacted by cold and illness, and families sometimes prioritized health over formal education during harsh weather, understanding that physical survival was paramount. Infants required particular attention. Early Edwardian knowledge emphasized warmth, cleanliness, and adequate feeding. Mothers and caregivers took extraordinary care to ensure babies were dressed appropriately for the cold, often in knitted or woolen garments, and kept away from drafts. Heating stoves were sometimes adjusted to maintain consistent warmth in nurseries, and homes were monitored carefully to prevent both chilling and smoke inhalation. Infant mortality was higher in winter months, highlighting the stakes of proper preparation and attentive care. Nutrition remained a cornerstone of winter resilience. High-calorie diets, often centered on root vegetables, grains, and preserved meats, helped sustain energy and maintain body heat.
Porridges, stews, and soups were staple meals, providing both warmth and sustenance. In wealthier households, imported goods, dairy products, and fresh meat supplemented these staples, while in working-class homes, the focus was on maximizing the caloric and nutritional value of locally available food. Families often prepared large batches of food in a single cooking session to conserve fuel, with meals reheated throughout the day to provide continuous warmth and sustenance. Social class deeply influenced winter survival strategies. Wealthier families had the resources to insulate homes, maintain multiple fires, and access superior nutrition and medical care. They could retreat to country estates or urban homes with better infrastructure and avoid exposure to extreme cold. Working-class families, by contrast, relied heavily on ingenuity, communal cooperation, and adaptive routines. Crowded tenements, thin clothing, and limited access to fuel increased their vulnerability. Yet, despite these challenges, knowledge of practical strategies, passed down through families and communities, allowed many to endure the harshest months. Survival was as much a matter of skill and resourcefulness as of economic means. Housing design continued to reflect these adaptations. Low ceilings, compact room layouts, and centralized hearths concentrated warmth, while heavy drapes, wall coverings, and floor rushes minimized heat loss. Families learned to create microclimates within their homes, ensuring that the spaces where people spent the most time remained as warm as possible. Fireplaces and stoves were tended with precision, and fuel rationing was carefully managed. In rural homes, proximity to animals sometimes contributed incidental warmth, as livestock sheltered indoors during storms added heat to the living space, albeit with additional considerations for hygiene and air quality. Community networks played an indispensable role in survival. Neighbors shared fuel, food, and knowledge, assisting each other in emergencies such as frozen pipes, heavy snowfall, or illness. Churches and charitable organizations distributed essential supplies and provided heated spaces for the most vulnerable. Informal networks ensured that no one was entirely isolated, while communal knowledge of clothing, cooking, and heating practices helped residents prepare for and endure extreme weather. In rural areas, village solidarity was reinforced by the necessity of maintaining access to resources, such as water, firewood, and food supplies, fostering resilience through cooperation. Education adapted to winter constraints as well. Urban classrooms were heated with coal stoves, and teachers emphasized both academic lessons and practical skills necessary for winter survival. Children learned about health, hygiene, food preparation, and clothing management, knowledge that was vital for both immediate well-being and long-term competence in household management. In rural areas where attendance could be disrupted by snow or illness, informal lessons in homes or community halls provided continuity. Education became intertwined with practical survival, ensuring that the next generation was equipped with essential skills for enduring harsh winters. Daily routines during winter were carefully calibrated. Activities were scheduled to minimize exposure to cold, with outdoor tasks performed early in the day when sunlight offered warmth, and indoor tasks prioritized during the darkest hours. Families organized cooking, cleaning, and heating tasks to maintain continuous warmth and nutrition. Even leisure was structured to conserve energy and maintain morale. Storytelling, sewing, music, and games were common evening activities, fostering psychological resilience while minimizing unnecessary exposure to cold. These routines reflected a holistic approach to survival, blending practical, cultural, and emotional strategies. Psychological resilience was as vital as physical endurance. Long winter nights, isolation, and persistent cold could sap morale. Social interaction, family bonding, and cultural rituals provided critical emotional support. Shared meals, community gatherings, and religious observances offered warmth beyond a physical, creating a sense of continuity and stability in an otherwise harsh environment. Mental fortitude, reinforced by social cohesion and cultural practice, allowed Edwardians to endure conditions that might have otherwise overwhelmed individuals or families. By combining attentive childcare, nutrition, clothing management, housing adaptations, community support, and cultural routines, Edwardians navigated the complex challenges of winter. Survival was an active, continuous process, requiring foresight, cooperation, and skill. The season shaped nearly every aspect of life, from domestic management to education, from work schedules to social interactions. Through ingenuity and resilience, Edwardians transformed winter from a threat into a managed challenge, demonstrating both the human capacity for adaptation and the critical role of community and culture in enduring harsh environmental conditions.
Winter work in the Edwardian era required careful adaptation and resilience. For laborers, tradespeople, and artisans, the cold months posed both physical and logistical challenges. Factories and workshops often lacked adequate heating, leaving workers exposed to icy drafts and frozen machinery. Clothing was essential, not only for warmth but also for practicality. Thick woolen layers, gloves, scarves, and hats were worn throughout the workday, and footwear was designed to navigate icy streets and factory floors. Some trades, such as blacksmithing or boiler work, offered incidental warmth from furnaces or furnaces' residual heat, but for most, sustaining energy and maintaining dexterity in sub-zero temperatures demanded both physical endurance and careful planning. Merchants and shopkeepers faced unique obstacles. Maintaining customer traffic during snowstorms required preparation. Streets were sometimes cleared by local authorities or business collectives, but proprietors often took extra measures, laying sand or straw in front of storefronts to reduce slips. Shops had to be kept warm enough for both employees and customers, often relying on coal stoves or fireplaces. At the same time, merchants carefully managed inventory, ensuring that perishable goods survived frozen delivery conditions or indoor fluctuations in temperature. Maintaining continuity of supply was essential to sustaining livelihood during winter months. Artisans and home-based trades also adapted to winter conditions. Tailors, shoemakers, and seamstresses worked indoors, but the chill and unheated rooms made precision tasks more difficult. To cope, families used small stoves to provide localized warmth, often positioning work tables near the heat source. Tools and materials were stored carefully to prevent damage from moisture or freezing, and routines were adjusted to maximize daylight, which could be scarce during the shortest winter days. Despite these challenges, winter work often intensified as demand for warm clothing, boots, and household textiles increased in response to seasonal needs. Agricultural work shifted dramatically in winter. Crops were mostly dormant, but livestock required constant attention. Feeding, sheltering, and monitoring animals during freezing temperatures were daily necessities. Ice and snow often blocked access to water sources, so families improvised, breaking ice or melting snow for drinking water. Rural laborers supplemented their income with winter-specific work, such as firewood collection, maintenance of fences and buildings, and food preservation. Seasonal rhythms dictated a delicate balance between survival tasks, domestic chores, and economic activity, and each household adapted according to local conditions and available resources. Food preparation and preservation were especially important during winter. Root vegetables, grains, and preserved meats were staples, and households developed careful strategies to prevent spoilage. Smokehouses, cellars, and pantries were monitored daily. Baking and cooking not only provided sustenance, but also contributed heat to the household, a secondary benefit often exploited by resourceful families. Large pots simmering on stoves provided continuous warmth, while communal kitchens in some villages allowed for shared labor and distribution of prepared foods. These practices reflected both practical necessity and communal collaboration, as food security became a central concern during harsh months. Transportation challenges continued to shape winter routines. Snow and ice could render roads impassable, delaying deliveries of coal, food, and other essentials. Horse-drawn sleighs, sledges, and reinforced carts were used in rural areas, while urban residents relied on careful walking or early trams and carriages.
Merchants and artisans sometimes coordinate deliveries to avoid the worst weather, and families maintained emergency reserves to account for disruptions. Even with preparation, winter travel demanded stamina, courage, and ingenuity, as accidents, falls, or frozen routes were a constant risk. Community cooperation extended into work routines. Neighboring households often shared labor and resources to meet winter demands, such as chopping firewood, repairing fences, or assisting with deliveries. Religious and charitable organizations provided additional support, offering temporary employment, food, or warmth to those in need. Collective action allowed communities to survive even the most severe weather events, reinforcing the idea that endurance during Edwardian winters depended on both individual effort and social solidarity. Leisure adapted to these conditions as well. While outdoor recreation was limited by snow, ice, and frigid temperatures, indoor activities flourished. Families engaged in sewing, knitting, and repairing clothing, tasks that were both practical and social. Music, storytelling, reading, and games provided psychological warmth and strengthened social bonds. Community events, often centered in churches or halls, offered safe spaces for interaction, allowing both adults and children to maintain morale during months of reduced sunlight and extended nights. Leisure was never purely recreational. It was an essential aspect of survival, sustaining emotional well-being as well as social cohesion. Children contributed significantly to both survival and domestic work. From a young age, they learned to fetch water, carry coal, care for younger siblings, and assist with food preparation. Education often incorporated lessons on practical skills, teaching children how to dress for the cold, tend fire safely, and maintain personal hygiene. Winter became a period of skill building and apprenticeship, where survival knowledge was passed down from one generation to the next. These routines instilled resilience, responsibility, and adaptability, preparing children to navigate the challenges of seasonal hardship throughout their lives. Clothing and textiles became a central focus during winter. Demand for warm garments, blankets, and insulating household materials increased sharply. Tailors and seamstresses worked long hours producing layered clothing, while families mended and repurposed older garments. Wool and flannel were the most common fabrics, valued for their heat retention and durability. Scarves, gloves, boots, and hats were essential for both adults and children, and attention to these items could determine the difference between comfort and exposure during the harshest months. Winter survival was ultimately a synthesis of labor, resourcefulness, and social adaptation. Families coordinated domestic work, income-generating activities, and community collaboration to ensure warmth, nourishment, and continuity of livelihood. Seasonal challenges shaped routines, dictated social behaviors, and reinforced the interdependence of households within towns and villages. The strategies developed during this period reflected a nuanced understanding of the environment, blending practical skill, cultural knowledge, and communal support to overcome the formidable obstacles posed by Edwardian winters. By balancing work, leisure, social cooperation, and household management, Edwardians created a sophisticated approach to enduring winter. Each adaptation, from clothing and nutrition to community networks and work routines, were interconnected, forming a holistic system of resilience. The harsh months were a time of both challenge and ingenuity, shaping the rhythm of life and leaving a lasting imprint on the culture and practices of the era.
Public health was a major concern during Edwardian winters, particularly in urban centers. Cities faced crowded housing, limited sanitation, and poorly insulated buildings, all of which exacerbated the spread of illnesses. Influenza, pneumonia, bronchitis, and tuberculosis were common, and outbreaks were often most severe during the coldest months. Municipal authorities and charitable organizations began to take an active role in addressing these challenges. Promoting vaccination campaigns were available, distributing cold and clothing to the poorest families, and establishing heated public spaces for those in need. Although medical knowledge was not as advanced as today, preventative measures, ventilation, cleanliness, adequate clothing, and proper nutrition were recognized as essential for survival. Rural communities faced different but equally formidable challenges. Isolation, harsh weather, and limited access to doctors meant that families had to rely heavily on local knowledge and traditional remedies. Herbal treatments, poultices, and home-prepared medicines were commonly used to combat winter illnesses. Knowledge of plants, diet, and preventative care was passed down through generations, creating a practical system of healthcare embedded in daily life. The physical demands of rural labor, combined with exposure to cold and damp, required constant vigilance to avoid injury and illness, making survival an ongoing effort rather than a passive state. Housing and urban infrastructure directly affected health outcomes. Poorly heated tenements, drafty windows, and damp walls made it easy for illness to take hold. Families learned to concentrate warmth in key living spaces, sealing off unused rooms, using heavy curtains and rugs, and positioning stoves or fireplaces strategically. Floors were often covered with rushes, carpets, or additional wooden boards to reduce cold penetration. These measures not only provided physical comfort, but also reduced the risk of respiratory and circulatory problems associated with prolonged exposure to cold. Nutrition played a vital role in winter health. Hearty meals provided energy to sustain body heat and strength to resist illness. Stews, porridges, roasted meats, and root vegetables were staples, supplying both calories and essential nutrients. Wealthier households had access to imported fruits, dairy products, and varied proteins, while working-class families relied on stored root vegetables, grains, and preserved meats. Supplementing diets with hot beverages like tea or broth offered additional warmth and hydration. Seasonal planning for food storage, from cellars to pantries, ensured that households could maintain nutrition even when extreme weather disrupted markets or deliveries. Childcare and protection of the young were critical considerations. Infants and children were particularly vulnerable to cold and disease, and families prioritized warmth and proper clothing. Multiple layers, knitted garments, hats, scarves, and mittens were standard, and children often slept under extra blankets with heated objects for added warmth. Education emphasized both practical survival skills and health awareness, teaching children how to dress appropriately, care for the sick, and maintain personal hygiene. Family routines were carefully structured to balance outdoor tasks with indoor warmth and nourishment, ensuring that the youngest members of the household remained safe and healthy. Community initiatives were central to urban winter survival. Charitable organizations, churches, and civic groups organized distribution of coal, firewood, clothing, and food to the most vulnerable. Public baths provided clean and heated facilities, mitigating the risk of illness in households without adequate water or heating. These networks of support were essential in densely populated areas, where disease spread quickly and where individual households often lacked sufficient resources to survive harsh winter conditions alone. Social cohesion, reinforced by shared responsibility and mutual aid, became a lifeline for many families. Transportation continued to shape winter survival. Snow and ice posed hazards for both pedestrians and vehicles, limiting access to markets, schools, and workplaces. Urban streets were cleared where possible, and walking paths were treated with sand or straw to reduce accidents. Rural areas relied on horse-drawn sleighs, sledges, and improvised pathways to maintain mobility. Even with these adaptations, winter travel remained difficult, requiring careful planning, appropriate clothing, and contingency supplies. Communities often coordinated efforts to ensure essential travel could occur safely, such as transporting food or providing assistance to those stranded by weather. Heating technology remained central to both health and comfort. Coal stoves and fireplaces were the primary sources of warmth, and families learned to optimize their use. Proper airflow, stove placement, and fuel management were critical to maintain steady heat. Wealthier households experimented with early forms of central heating using steam or hot water, while rural families relied on wood or peat stoves. Knowledge of heat retention combined with practical skills in stove operation, chimney management, and insulation determined the ability to maintain comfortable and safe living conditions during the coldest months. Clothing innovations continued to adapt to seasonal needs. Layering was standard, with wool and flannel forming the foundation of winter attire. Fur-lined coats, gloves, hats, and scarves were essential for protection against frostbite and wind chill. Children's clothing emphasized coverage and warmth, often with high collars, mittens, and multiple layers to preserve heat. Families also repurposed older garments, patching and reinforcing worn items to extend their usefulness. In both urban and rural settings, clothing was as much a tool of survival as a reflection of social status. Leisure and indoor activities were crucial for psychological resilience. Winter brought long nights and limited daylight, which could lead to isolation and low morale.
Families engaged in reading, sewing, music, storytelling, and games, creating warmth and comfort in the home. Community events, often organized through churches, halls, or schools, allowed social interaction, reinforced cohesion, and provided mental stimulation. These practices were more than recreation. They were essential strategies to maintain morale, sustain routine, and cope with the physical and emotional challenges of winter. By integrating public health measures, rural and urban adaptations, childcare, nutrition, transportation, heating, clothing, and social networks, Edwardians built a comprehensive approach to surviving winter. The season demanded careful planning, practical knowledge, and cooperation across households and communities. Far from passive endurance, winter survival in this era was an active, multifaceted system of strategies, reflecting both the ingenuity and resilience of Edwardian society.
Winter in the Edwardian era was not only a test of survival, but also a period that shaped trade, work, and urban services. Merchants, shopkeepers, and artisans had to adapt their businesses to the constraints of cold, snow, and shorter daylight hours. Shops often relied on stoves or small fireplaces to provide warmth for both employees and customers, and careful placement of goods ensured they remained protected from freezing temperatures. Seasonal products, such as warm clothing, woolen blankets, and hot foods, became high-demand items, driving shifts in production and marketing strategies. Businesses that failed to anticipate the winter's challenges risked losing income, while those that adapted effectively maintained both profitability and relevance. Artisans and craftspeople, including tailors, shoemakers, and cobblers, found winter a season of both challenge and opportunity. The demand for warm clothing, boots, gloves, and winter accessories increased significantly, prompting longer working hours and innovative production techniques. Families often contributed to home-based trades, mending, knitting, or assisting in preparation of goods for sale. In rural areas, this work was balanced with domestic duties and care of livestock, reflecting the dual responsibilities of survival and livelihood. These activities highlighted how winter shaped economic patterns as much as daily life. Urban services evolved to meet the specific demands of winter. Public transportation had to navigate icy streets, snow-covered tracks, and disrupted schedules. Trams, horse-drawn carriages, and early motor vehicles adapted with studded wheels, sleighs, or alternate routes to maintain essential movement. Postal services faced delays, and merchants adjusted by holding extra stock or organizing deliveries around anticipated disruptions. Municipal authorities worked to clear streets, maintain water supplies, and ensure public safety, particularly for vulnerable populations such as the elderly and children. These urban adaptations were crucial to maintaining both commerce and daily life during harsh months. Markets and food supply were closely tied to seasonal conditions. Urban vendors relied on local or regional sources for vegetables, meat, and staples, often transporting goods across difficult roads or frozen waterways. Rural households depended on stored foods, root cellars, and preserved supplies to sustain themselves. Community sharing and bartering sometimes occurred when shortages threatened individual families. These practices reflected a deep understanding of seasonal rhythms, emphasizing preparation, foresight, and cooperation as essential tools for both survival and economic stability. Seasonal entertainment played a vital role in maintaining morale during long winter months. Indoor activities such as reading, music, dancing, games, and storytelling offered warmth and diversion, while larger gatherings in churches, halls, or community centers provided opportunities for social interaction. Winter fairs, holiday celebrations, and religious observances were central to the cultural life of both urban and rural communities. These events strengthened social cohesion, provided access to resources and news, and created structured routines that countered the isolation imposed by cold and darkness. Leisure and social rituals became intertwined with survival, sustaining mental and emotional well-being as much as physical resilience. Child labor and education adapted to the season's challenges. Many children contributed to household and economic tasks, such as fetching water, tending fires, and assisting in workshops or small shops. School attendance fluctuated with weather conditions, especially in rural areas where snow and ice could prevent travel.
Teachers adapted by organizing lessons at home or in communal spaces, ensuring continuity of education. Lessons often included practical skills like clothing care, food preparation, and basic health practices, equipping children with knowledge essential for surviving winter. The combination of labor, education, and family responsibility created a structure in which survival skills were learned alongside academic and cultural instruction. Health and hygiene continued to dominate winter life. Overcrowding, damp housing, and insufficient heating increased susceptibility to respiratory illnesses. Families monitored air quality in living spaces, managed stoves to provide consistent warmth, and emphasized clean clothing and bedding. Rural households relied on traditional remedies, while urban populations had more access to doctors and public health initiatives. Herbal treatments, poultices, and hot beverages were widely used, reflecting a combination of folk knowledge and emerging medical understanding. Nutrition, warmth, and hygiene together formed a triad of preventative measures that shaped winter survival strategies. Clothing remained a cornerstone of adaptation. Layering, wool, flannel, and fur provided essential insulation, while boots, gloves, scarves, and hats protected extremities from frostbite. Families repaired and repurposed garments to maximize utility, and the production of winter clothing became a vital economic and domestic activity. The quality and quantity of clothing directly impacted resilience, influencing energy levels, comfort, and the ability to perform both labor and domestic tasks during the harshest months. Transportation and mobility were central to both survival and social interaction. Pedestrians navigated icy streets with care, often using walking sticks or studded footwear. Horse-drawn sleighs and carts enabled rural families to transport fuel, water, and food over snow-covered terrain. Urban residents adapted to disruptions in trams and carriages by planning trips strategically, keeping extra stock at home and relying on community assistance when travel became impossible. Maintaining mobility was crucial not only for economic activity, but also for access to healthcare, education, and social connection. By combining winter trade, artisan work, urban services, food management, seasonal entertainment, childcare, health precautions, clothing adaptations, and transportation strategies, Edwardians developed a sophisticated system for enduring harsh months. The season shaped both individual routines and community structures, influencing labor, leisure, education, and social cohesion. Survival was an active, coordinated process, reflecting ingenuity, resilience, and the integration of practical, cultural, and communal strategies. Winter was not merely endured, it was managed, anticipated, and woven into the fabric of daily life.
Rural winter survival in the Edwardian era demanded a combination of foresight, labor, and intimate knowledge of the natural environment. Farms and cottages were isolated, often miles from markets, medical care, or neighbors. This isolation made preparation essential. Families stockpiled food, fuel, and water well before the first frost. Root cellars, pantries, and smokehouses were carefully organized to protect vegetables, meats, and grains from spoilage. Firewood and peat were chopped, stacked, and stored to ensure a consistent supply of heat. Water sources had to be monitored and maintained, with ice broken daily or snow melted to provide drinking and cooking water. Every aspect of rural life required planning, with survival dependent on careful resource management. Household routines were structured around warmth and efficiency. Central hearths or stoves were the heart of the home, providing heat for cooking, bathing, and comfort. Furniture was positioned to retain warmth, and doors between rooms were kept closed to conserve energy. Daily chores were scheduled to minimize exposure to the cold. Milking, feeding livestock, collecting water, and chopping wood were often done in the early daylight hours when temperatures were slightly higher. Women managed indoor activities such as cooking, cleaning, sewing, and childcare, while men focused on outdoor tasks or heavier labor. Children contributed to both domestic and agricultural work, learning essential survival skills from a young age. Fuel management was a constant concern. Coal, wood, and peat were precious resources that had to be rationed carefully. Families monitored stoves and fires to maintain steady warmth without wasting fuel. Firewood was often split into smaller pieces for efficient burning, and ashes were sometimes reused for cleaning, insulation, or fertilization. Even minor mismanagement could result in bitterly cold nights. highlighting the critical role of careful planning and disciplined routines. Nutrition remained central to rural winter survival. Meals emphasized caloric density and warmth, with stews, porridges, and root vegetables forming the staples of the diet. Meat, eggs, and dairy were incorporated when available, often preserved through salting, smoking, or drying. Families prioritized hearty breakfasts to fuel physically demanding work, while evening meals served both to nourish and warm the household. Food was carefully rationed, with careful attention to preventing waste and ensuring that supplies lasted through extended periods of isolation or harsh weather. Livestock required constant attention. Animals provided not only food, but also warmth, labor, and a form of economic security. Shelters were insulated and maintained, with bedding replaced regularly to protect against damp and cold. Livestock feeding was carefully scheduled, often requiring multiple trips outdoors each day despite severe weather. Frozen water sources had to be broken or melted, while snow and ice removal ensured that animals could access grazing areas or stored fodder. The health of livestock directly impacted human survival, linking animal husbandry to household resilience in a tangible and immediate way. Health and hygiene were critical concerns. Rural families relied on practical knowledge, herbal remedies, and home-based care for both humans and animals. Cold and damp increased susceptibility to respiratory and circulatory illnesses, so households emphasized clothing, layered bedding, and consistent stove management. Cleanliness, though challenging in winter, was maintained wherever possible, with attention to clothing, bedding, and cooking areas. Traditional knowledge passed down through generations guided families in treating colds, fevers, and injuries, often blending empirical experience with folk remedies. Social cohesion and communal support played a central role in rural winter survival. Villages and farming communities coordinated shared tasks, such as clearing roads, transporting firewood, or assisting with livestock emergencies. Neighborly cooperation ensured that essential supplies and services remained available, even during severe storms or extended periods of snow. Local events, religious observances, and communal gatherings reinforced social bonds, providing both emotional support and practical assistance during challenging months. These networks were essential to endurance, as individual households could not survive entirely on their own during extreme conditions. Clothing and textiles were carefully managed for protection and longevity. Layering was essential, with wool, flannel, and fur providing insulation against frost and wind. Outer garments were repaired and repurposed to maximize usefulness, while children were dressed in multiple layers to preserve heat. Hats, scarves, mittens, and heavy boots protect extremities, where exposure could quickly lead to frostbite. Proper clothing was both a practical necessity and a reflection of careful planning, with every garment contributing to the household's overall winter resilience. Leisure and cultural practices supported psychological well-being. Long nights and confined indoor spaces could otherwise lead to isolation or low morale. Storytelling, music, reading, sewing, and communal gatherings offered warmth and engagement. Seasonal events, holiday traditions, and religious observances provided structured opportunities for socialization, reinforcing community cohesion while also offering distraction from the monotony and hardship of winter. These practices demonstrated an understanding that survival was not merely physical, but also emotional, requiring attention to mental health and social bonds. Resource management extended to nearly every aspect of rural life. Fuel, food, clothing, water, and tools had to be rationed, stored, and utilized efficiently. Families developed systems to track supplies, anticipate shortages, and repurpose materials. Even minor lapses in organization could have serious consequences, emphasizing the importance of foresight and discipline. This meticulous approach created a rhythm to winter life, with preparation, maintenance, and adaptation forming a continuous cycle that sustained households through the harshest conditions. By combining careful household routines, fuel and food management, livestock care, clothing strategies, communal cooperation, and cultural engagement, rural Edwardians navigated the severe winter months with resilience and skill. The season changed not only daily routines, but also social structures, economic practices, and cultural traditions. Winter survival demanded constant attention, ingenuity, and coordination, embedding a culture of preparedness and endurance that defined the rhythms of Edwardian rural life. Urban winter survival in the Edwardian era presented a complex set of challenges. Cities were densely populated, Housing was often cramped and poorly insulated, and sanitation systems were limited. Cold, damp conditions increased the spread of respiratory illnesses, influenza, and other infectious diseases, making winter a season of heightened health risk. Families had to navigate these challenges while maintaining work, education, and social connections. Survival required careful management of indoor spaces, clothing, nutrition, and communal resources, blending practical skill with social cooperation. Housing in urban areas often consisted of tenements, row houses, or small apartments. Poorly insulated walls, drafty windows, and inadequate heating made warmth difficult to maintain. Families concentrated activity in one or two heated rooms, closing off unused spaces to conserve fuel. Fireplaces and coal stoves were central to urban households, providing both heat and a place to cook. Floors were covered with carpets or rushes, and heavy drapes were used to reduce heat loss through windows. Households developed routines to maximize warmth. Cooking, cleaning, and other domestic work were scheduled to maintain consistent heat throughout the day. Sanitation was a pressing concern. Overcrowded conditions, limited access to clean water, and rudimentary sewage systems increased the risk of illness. Urban residents learned to manage waste carefully, maintain personal hygiene, and monitor food storage to prevent contamination. Public baths, charitable organizations, and community initiatives provided additional support, offering heated spaces and access to clean water for those unable to maintain hygiene at home. These measures helped mitigate some of the dangers posed by winter's harsh conditions. Nutrition was a cornerstone of survival. Urban families relied on markets for fresh produce, meat, and staple foods, while storage of preserved goods like root vegetables, grains, and salted meat ensured continuity during supply disruptions. Hearty meals were essential to maintain energy and warmth, with stews, porridges, and soups forming the foundation of the diet. Tea, broth, and hot drinks provided hydration and comfort, while careful rationing prevented shortages during extended periods of extreme cold or transportation delays. Access to nutrition was often a direct reflection of social class, with wealthier households enjoying a wider variety of food and the working class relying on locally available staples. Childcare and education adapted to the winter environment. Schools were heated with coal stoves, but attendance fluctuated due to illness or snow-covered streets. Teachers often provided practical instruction on health, hygiene, and household management alongside academic lessons, equipping children with skills essential for winter survival. At home, children contributed to household duties, such as fetching water, tending fires, assisting with cooking, and caring for younger siblings. These responsibilities reinforced routines of discipline, cooperation, and adaptability, ensuring that young members of the household were active participants in survival. Urban labor during winter presented unique challenges. Factory work, workshops, and service-based employment continued despite freezing temperatures. Workers relied on layered clothing, gloves, and scarves to maintain warmth, and stoves or small heaters were often used in workplaces when available. Merchants, shopkeepers, and tradespeople adjusted hours, stock, and delivery methods to account for snow and ice, ensuring continuity of services and economic stability. Even small businesses required careful winter planning to protect both employees and customers from the harsh conditions outside. Transportation was a constant concern in cities. Snow and ice blocked streets, slowed trams and horse-drawn carriages, and complicated pedestrian movement. Walking was often treacherous, and early motor vehicles required careful maintenance and navigation. Urban residents learned to anticipate delays, maintain extra supplies, and rely on social networks for assistance when travel became dangerous or impossible. Mobility was essential not only for work and trade, but also for accessing food, medical care, and social support. Community networks and public services were critical to urban survival. Churches, charitable organizations, and local councils distributed coal, firewood, clothing, and food to families in need.
Volunteers assisted with heating, transportation, and caregiving, particularly for the elderly, sick, or very young. Public spaces were sometimes heated to provide refuge for those without sufficient warmth at home. These systems of support reinforced social cohesion, enabling urban populations to endure conditions that might have overwhelmed isolated households. Leisure and cultural adaptation were vital for psychological resilience. Long nights, indoor confinement, and reduced daylight could lead to isolation and low morale. Families engaged in storytelling, music, sewing, and games to sustain emotional well-being. Community events, holiday celebrations, and religious gatherings offered social interaction and structured routines, maintaining morale while fostering shared experience and collective endurance. Mental fortitude was as important as physical preparation in surviving urban winters. Clothing remained central to urban survival. Layering, wool, flannel, and fur were essential for warmth, while hats, gloves, scarves, and boots protected against frostbite. Families repaired and repurposed garments to extend their usefulness, and attention to proper clothing allowed urban residents to perform labor, maintain household routines, and navigate icy streets safely. Clothing served both practical and symbolic purposes, reflecting social status, resourcefulness, and preparedness. By combining housing adaptation, sanitation, nutrition, childcare, urban labor strategies, transportation planning, community support, leisure, and clothing, Edwardians managed the complex demands of city life during winter. Survival was an integrated process, requiring foresight, skill, and cooperation across households and neighborhoods. Urban winter life shaped routines, social relationships, and economic activity, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of environmental challenges and human adaptability.
Medical care and public health became especially critical during Edwardian winters. Cold, damp conditions exacerbated respiratory illnesses, influenza, bronchitis, and pneumonia, while overcrowded urban housing increased the risk of epidemics. Families relied on a combination of home remedies, emerging medical practices, and public health initiatives to maintain well-being. Herbal teas, poultices, and warming compresses were common for minor ailments, while wealthier households had access to physicians, medicines, and specialized care. Knowledge of preventative measures, including proper clothing, warmth, nutrition, and hygiene, was widely shared and often passed down through generations. Epidemics presented a significant challenge. Influenza outbreaks, particularly in cities, could spread rapidly in crowded, poorly heated buildings. Public health authorities encouraged isolation of the sick, improved ventilation and sanitation to reduce transmission. Charitable organizations and civic institutions provided additional support, distributing food, clothing, and coal to those affected. Rural areas, though less densely populated, faced challenges of isolation, delayed access to medical care, and limited resources, making knowledge of home remedies and preventative routines crucial. Survival during epidemics required coordination, vigilance, and practical ingenuity. Heating innovations played a central role in both comfort and survival. Coal stoves and cast iron fireplaces remained the primary sources of warmth, but families learned to maximize their efficiency. Proper fuel management, stove placement, and airflow ensured consistent indoor temperatures. Wealthier households experimented with early forms of central heating using steam or hot water, while rural homes relied on wood or peat stoves. Even simple practices, like closing off unused rooms, covering windows with heavy drapes, and insulating floors with carpets or rushes, significantly improved warmth. Mastery of heating techniques was a critical skill, often shared through communities and reinforced by necessity. Home management extended to careful oversight of ventilation and indoor air quality. Poorly ventilated rooms, combined with smoke from stoves and fireplaces, could aggravate respiratory issues. Families balanced the need for warmth with the need for fresh air, using small windows, vents, or periodic airing to maintain health.
The integration of heating, ventilation, and household organization reflected a sophisticated understanding of the indoor environment and its impact on both physical and psychological well-being. Nutrition continued to be central to winter resilience. Diets emphasized caloric density and warmth, with soups, stews, porridge, roasted meats, and root vegetables forming the core of meals. Hot beverages, such as tea, broth, and cocoa, provided comfort, hydration, and additional warmth. Seasonal planning and careful storage were critical. Root cellars, pantries, and preserved foods ensured continuity even during severe weather or transportation disruptions. Nutrition, closely linked to health, energy, and resistance to illness, was both a practical and strategic concern during harsh months. Childcare remained a priority. Infants and young children were particularly vulnerable to cold and illness, requiring careful attention to clothing, bedding, and nutrition. Nightcaps, mittens, layered clothing, and heated bedding helped preserve warmth, while daily routines balanced outdoor exposure, chores, and rest. Education emphasized practical skills alongside academics, teaching children about hygiene, food preparation, and clothing care. Winter became a period of skill acquisition, where survival knowledge was passed down and integrated into daily routines. Community support reinforced individual and household survival. Churches, charitable organizations, and civic institutions distributed coal, firewood, clothing, and food to vulnerable populations. Volunteers assisted with heating, care, and transportation, ensuring that those most at risk, elderly, sick, or very young, received essential support. These networks mitigated the risks posed by cold, isolation, and disease, illustrating the importance of social cohesion in winter survival. Clothing continued to evolve as a tool of adaptation. Layered garments, wool, flannel, and fur provided insulation, while hats, scarves, gloves, and boots protected against frostbite and wind chill. Families repaired, repurposed, and maintained clothing to extend its utility, emphasizing both practicality and resourcefulness. Proper clothing enabled mobility, labor, and domestic work, directly influencing health, comfort, and the capacity to endure extended periods of cold. Leisure and cultural practices remained essential for psychological resilience. Long nights, limited daylight, and indoor confinement could cause isolation or low morale. Storytelling, music, games, and seasonal celebrations offered warmth and engagement, while community gatherings reinforced social bonds. Mental fortitude, supported by routine, culture, and interaction, was as important as physical preparation in sustaining endurance through winter months. By combining medical knowledge, heating innovation, nutrition, childcare, community support, clothing adaptation, and cultural engagement, Edwardians developed a comprehensive system to survive and thrive during the harshest months. Winter demanded foresight, skill, and cooperation across households and communities, blending practical, social, and emotional strategies into an integrated approach to resilience. The season shaped daily routines, social structures, and cultural practices, leaving an enduring legacy of adaptation and human ingenuity.
Winter festivals, cultural traditions, and religious observances played a vital role in Edwardian life, providing warmth, comfort, and structure during the coldest months. Communities used these seasonal events to reinforce social bonds, maintain morale, and coordinate resources. From Christmas and New Year's celebrations to local fairs and church gatherings, these traditions created opportunities for social interaction, emotional support, and communal resilience. Even in the harshest conditions, these events offered relief from isolation and reinforced a sense of continuity, belonging, and cultural identity. Religious observances were particularly central to winter life. Churches offered heated spaces where families could gather safely, attend services, and receive charity if needed. Religious festivals, such as Christmas and Epiphany, combined spiritual significance with practical benefits. Communal meals, Gift exchanges and social gatherings ensured that both physical and emotional needs were met. Clergy and parishioners often coordinated the distribution of coal, firewood, clothing, and food to the most vulnerable, highlighting the interconnectedness of faith, charity, and survival. These traditions provided not only cultural enrichment, but also a structured system of support for families facing winter hardships. Fairs, markets, and public celebrations adapted to the season, providing both economic opportunities and entertainment. Vendors sold warm clothing, hot foods, and handmade goods, meeting the heightened demand for winter necessities. Rural communities relied on local fairs to supplement their food supply, barter goods, and exchange practical knowledge about winter survival. These gatherings reinforced social cohesion and provided a venue for passing down skills, stories, and traditions that were essential for enduring the months of cold and darkness. Cultural rituals also emphasized the importance of home and hearth. Families lit candles, decorated spaces, and organized meals and games that reinforced domestic warmth and emotional comfort. Storytelling, music, and games passed down folklore, historical narratives, and moral lessons, sustaining psychological resilience. Winter evenings became opportunities for shared learning, creativity, and engagement, blending practical education with entertainment. These indoor activities were vital, providing mental stimulation, emotional support, and social bonding during long periods of limited outdoor activity. Charity and community support were intertwined with cultural and religious practices. Organized collections of food, clothing, and fuel were distributed during festivals, ensuring that poorer households could participate in seasonal celebrations and maintain essential warmth. These efforts fostered a sense of shared responsibility and strengthened community bonds, illustrating the symbiotic relationship between cultural life and practical survival. Communities recognized that enduring winter was not only a physical challenge, but also a social and moral obligation. Children played an important role in seasonal traditions. They participated in festive activities, helped with household preparations, and learned practical skills through observation and involvement. Gift exchanges, caroling, and storytelling provided entertainment while reinforcing lessons about sharing, community responsibility, and resilience. Education and cultural engagement were intertwined, preparing young members of society for the demands of winter while maintaining social cohesion and continuity of tradition. Work and labor were adapted around these cultural rhythms. Seasonal celebrations often coincided with brief pauses in agricultural or domestic work, providing respite and rejuvenation. Rural and urban households alike used these periods to prepare for the most challenging winter weeks, coordinating stockpiling, maintenance, and household management. Even leisure and celebration were integrated into the practical demands of survival, reflecting a holistic approach to balancing work, rest, and community life. Winter festivals also reinforced intergenerational connections. Older generations passed down knowledge of seasonal rituals, survival techniques, and cultural narratives, while younger members absorbed practical and social skills through participation. This exchange ensured that essential knowledge, ranging from food preservation and fire management to clothing repair and social customs, was preserved and transmitted, sustaining both survival and cultural inanity. Mental and emotional resilience was a direct benefit of cultural and communal activities. By providing structured, meaningful engagement, festivals, religious observances, and home rituals countered the monotony, isolation, and psychological strain of long, dark winters. Families and communities found joy, purpose, and stability within these practices, demonstrating the critical role of culture and social interaction in enduring environmental hardship. By integrating cultural traditions, religious observances, seasonal fairs, domestic rituals, charity, and intergenerational knowledge, Edwardians developed a layered system of winter resilience. Physical survival was closely linked with emotional, social, and cultural well-being. Winter was not merely a test of endurance, but also an opportunity to strengthen communities, preserve traditions, and cultivate skills essential for life in harsh conditions. The interplay of culture and survival shaped both daily life and broader social structures, leaving a lasting legacy in Edwardian society. Winter festivals, cultural traditions, and religious observances played a vital role in Edwardian life, providing warmth, comfort, and structure during the coldest months. Communities used these seasonal events to reinforce social bonds, maintain morale, and coordinate resources. From Christmas and New Year celebrations to local fairs and church gatherings, these traditions created opportunities for social interaction, emotional support, and communal resilience. Even in the harshest conditions, these events offered relief from isolation and reinforced a sense of continuity, belonging, and cultural identity. Religious observances were particularly central to winter life. Churches offered heated spaces where families could gather safely, attend services, and receive charity if needed. Religious festivals, such as Christmas and Epiphany, combined spiritual significance with practical benefits. Communal meals, gift exchanges, and social gatherings ensured that both physical and emotional needs were met. Clergy and parishioners often coordinated the distribution of coal, firewood, clothing, and food to the most vulnerable, highlighting the interconnectedness of faith, charity, and survival. These traditions provided not only cultural enrichment, but also a structured system of support for families facing winter hardships. Fairs, markets, and public celebrations adapted to the season, providing both economic opportunities and entertainment. Vendors sold warm clothing, hot foods, and handmade goods, meeting the heightened demand for winter necessities. Rural communities relied on local fairs to supplement their food supply, barter goods, and exchange practical knowledge about winter survival. These gatherings reinforced social cohesion and provided a venue for passing down skills, stories, and traditions that were essential for enduring the months of cold and darkness. Cultural rituals also emphasized the importance of home and hearth. Families lit candles, decorated spaces, and organized meals and games that reinforced domestic warmth and emotional comfort. Storytelling, music, and games passed down folklore, historical narratives, and moral lessons, sustaining psychological resilience. Winter evenings became opportunities for shared learning, creativity, and engagement, blending practical education with entertainment. These indoor activities were vital, providing mental stimulation, emotional support, and social bonding during long periods of limited outdoor activity. Charity and community support were intertwined with cultural and religious practices. Organized collections of food, clothing, and fuel were distributed during festivals, ensuring that poorer households could participate in seasonal celebrations and maintain essential warmth. These efforts fostered a sense of shared responsibility and strengthened community bonds, illustrating the symbiotic relationship between cultural life and practical survival. Communities recognized that enduring winter was not only a physical challenge but also a social and moral obligation. Children played an important role in seasonal traditions. They participated in festive activities, helped with household preparations, and learned practical skills through observation and involvement. Gift exchanges, caroling, and storytelling provided entertainment while reinforcing lessons about sharing, community responsibility, and resilience. Education and cultural engagement were intertwined, preparing young members of society for the demands of winter while maintaining social cohesion and continuity of tradition. Work and labor were adapted around these cultural rhythms. Seasonal celebrations often coincided with brief pauses in agricultural or domestic work, providing respite and rejuvenation. Rural and urban households alike used these periods to prepare for the most challenging winter weeks, coordinating stockpiling, maintenance, and household management. Even leisure and celebration were integrated into the practical demands of survival, reflecting a holistic approach to balancing work, rest, and community life. Winter festivals also reinforced intergenerational connections. Older generations passed down knowledge of seasonal rituals, survival techniques, and cultural narratives, while younger members absorbed practical and social skills through participation. This exchange ensured that essential knowledge, ranging from food preservation and fire management to clothing repair and social customs, was preserved and transmitted, sustaining both survival and cultural identity. Mental and emotional resilience was a direct benefit of cultural and communal activities. By providing structured, meaningful engagement, festivals, religious observances, and home rituals countered the monotony, isolation, and psychological strain of long, dark winters. Families and communities found joy, purpose, and stability within these practices, demonstrating the critical role of culture and social interaction in enduring environmental hardship. By integrating cultural traditions, religious observances, seasonal fairs, domestic rituals, charity, and intergenerational knowledge, Edwardians developed a layered system of winter resilience. Physical survival was closely linked with emotional, social, and cultural well-being.
Winter was not merely a test of endurance, but also an opportunity to strengthen communities, preserve traditions, and cultivate skills essential for life in harsh conditions. The interplay of culture and survival shaped both daily life and broader social structures, leaving a lasting legacy in Edwardian society.